Thanks to Foundation's reprinting Zetulpa into Standard and printing Sire 7 Deaths, this bulk rare has gone up almost 2,500% in price. A 2,500% price increase, going from 80 cents up to almost $20. Urborg Scavengers, specifically the Halo foil. It is disgusting with these cards. Very, very good combo cards. In this video, I'm going to talk about some additional cards that I think have a chance of seeing a similar spike to Urborg Scavengers here. Cards that are draining out of the TCG player market, where the supply is not going to meet the demand and the price is going to shoot up because of it. After that, I'll talk about some additional cards that have already jumped up in price, and a lot of them I had previously predicted in other videos in this series. For example, in the last video, I shouted out Arabo as a card that was draining out of the market pretty heavily due to Foundations printing a bunch of new cat stuff, and people like cats, and Arabo is a really good card in any cats deck, especially in Commander, especially as your Commander because it has Eminence, very strong card. If you wanted a near mint or a lightly played copy now, you gotta shell out almost $25. That's a $10 increase than when I called it out just 5 days ago. That's crazy. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel so you don't miss any more of these videos, and so you can purchase your cards before they go up in price, because who wants to pay $25 for an Arabo when you could have paid $14 just 5 days ago? Like, really. Just hit that subscribe button, it's super easy. And I gotta shout out Arcane Assets. Thank you Arcane Assets for sponsoring this video. At the end of this video, you'll be able to see my portfolio where I'll go through what cards I've been speculating on Arcane Assets to try to get #1 in the leaderboard to win that booster box. If you want to sign up for Arcane Assets, there's a link in the description of this video where you can do so. Now let's get into this, talking about some cards that I think have a chance of going up in price due to inventory just dropping and dropping and dropping. First off, I want to mention Archfiend of the Dross. I know that this card had recently spiked up pretty hard, then it leveled off and went down a little bit, but there was just in the last 5 days a strong resurgence in demand for this card. I don't know exactly why all of a sudden it has another push, but I mean, it already spiked up once to $7 and dropped back down to like $4 or $5 range. As of the recording of this video, you could find a copy for 50 cents. However, that's not including shipping, and I think that one had like $3 or $4 shipping or something like that. So the price didn't really actually change very much here. But what matters here is the inventory. A 40% decrease in listings is a pretty substantial drop for a card that's already seen spikes and is a powerhouse in Standard right now. Great with the Unholy Annex deck. Awesome card, and if it sells out again, I can't imagine that the spike isn't stronger than it was last time, considering the people that previously bought copies aren't selling their copies because they're in their Standard decks now. The speculators purchased their cards early for cheap, put them back on the market for more money. Now those are going out of the market, which means demand is outpacing those newly added copies, and another spike is likely to come. There's a Golgari deck that's been looking pretty strong in Standard, and a few cards from that Golgari deck are now moving in price, like Restless Cottage. Pretty cool land cycle, and this one in particular seeing a lot more play, and that can be noticed by the 34% drop in inventory. The price is already starting to go up, but this is a card that I could see that price continuing upward because of just Standard play. It's a good card, and it's going to see a lot of Standard play. In that same deck, with over 20% decreases in listings, you also have Mosswood Dread Knight and Cut Down, both cards that are very potent, powerful cards. Cut Down being a premier removal spell in the format. Mosswood Dread Knight, good recursive card draw. The deck continues to perform well. I can see all three of these cards just kind of moving out of the market. Paw Patch Formation saw almost 100 listings leave the market in the last 5 days. That's astonishing. That's a ton of listings to just evaporate for a card that's an uncommon, that's really, really, really inexpensive. I mean, if we have the same type of movement again this week, then that goes down to about 100 copies, and that means in like 2 weeks at this rate, this card could kind of disappear from the market. I don't think it's going to continue at that exact rate. I think it's probably going to slow down a bit because obviously people start having their copies, so they no longer need to buy more copies. But it's still a card that is seeing a ton of play. It's a great catch-all sideboard card, and main deckable in certain decks. I like it. I see this one moving up in price. Another removal piece that's been draining out of the market pretty hard is Get Lost. Get Lost is another premier removal piece inside Standard, and both versions saw over a 20% drop in listings over the last few days. The Showcase Harvester of Misery has saw a bit of an uptick in price, but a strong downtick in listings, and it is a very potent, powerful card, good enough that it's inside of like Vintage Cube and stuff like that. Like, this is a very strong card. It's essentially uncounterable removal, and it's seeing a good amount of Standard play as well. With just 21 copies on the market currently and a 30% decrease in listings, this doesn't have that many more copies to go before that price really skyrockets. And it did already move up a little bit, so that's showing that people are buying it at these higher prices. I think this card has legs and it's gonna run. Like, this thing's gonna go up in price. And then we have Tranquil Thrillback, another kind of catch-all card that just can kind of do a lot. Great sideboard piece, but all versions of this card have been draining out of the market recently. Between a 20 to 30% decrease in listings across copies is substantial, considering the fact that there's 3 different versions here and all of them are seeing massive decreases. That means that there's a lot of demand for this card, especially the Showcase and Extended Art, which have about 40 to 50 copies each. Those, if they continue draining at the same rate that they've been going, out of the market, expensive. And an important thing to note is that the price has not really changed on these. You can still pick up copies for around the same price that you could 5 days ago, so you still have time to pick up your copies before they go up in price. Now let's talk about some Foundation cards. It's still very early in the set's lifespan, so there's a lot of mixed things going on TCG Player where inventory isn't quite there yet, and certain cards are spiking because people really want them, but the inventory is not there to really help bring the prices down. So cards are like spiking up and dropping down, and there's a lot of swinginess going on right now. But there's a few cards I wanted to mention that really stood out to me. Voltwave is going to see play all the way back to Modern. The card's very good. I do think that it's priced pretty appropriately right now, but I wanted to mention it because of the fact that it had a pretty steep decrease in listings, and if that trend continues, the price can only go up. However, there still could be more inventory coming onto the market, but it is a card that has a lot more inventory than most cards from Foundations on TCG Player. One of the most popular cards in the set is Heir Apparent, and that one is seeing a pretty substantial decrease in listings while maintaining its price point, going up a little bit. I could see this going up a little further and then dropping down and down and down once people don't care as much about Heir Apparent. I'm expecting to be able to get copies of this card for like $3, hoping. I mean, this set's going to be in print for a long time, so it should drop down in price. Bloodthirsty Conqueror Showcase, I expect it to be an expensive card, but not where it is right now. I don't think that its current price is sustainable, but it saw a massive decrease in listings. This is a card that really you need to wait for inventory to return to the market before you'd want to pick it up. Same thing with the Manafoil Atali. There is no reason that this is as expensive as it is outside of the fact that there's only 2 copies currently on TCG Player. There's a lot of wonkiness going on here. Another Foundations card I wanted to mention, which is currently like in bulk rare territory, but it's extremely potent, and I think this card has a lot of room to grow because of how powerful it actually is, and that's Raise the Past. There's about 300 copies currently on TCG Player. It went down like 80 copies in the last 5 days, which is a lot, 22% decrease. Price hasn't really moved much, but it's just a very powerful card. And it's an auto-include in those Heir Apparent decks. It's an auto-include inside of like Luris Commander decks, stuff like that. Just a great card, and I'm sure that people are going to realize that, oh, this is a return everything from my graveyard into play in this deck. I want that. Let me put it in the deck. It's just going to take a little bit of a matter of time. I see this being like $5 card at some point. At the beginning of this video, I called out Syra 7 Deaths for being a key piece in that Urborg Scavengers deck. Well, Syra 7 Deaths is a card that I think is going to be pretty pricey, and it's showing that it's going to be pretty pricey already. Both the regular and borderless saw a lot of copies on the market early and are seeing a lot of decreases in listings already. This is one that I think is more telling than some of the other ones because it started with a large inventory, and that large inventory is definitely shrinking. In a similar boat, you have Twin Flame Tyrant. This card I don't think is as good as Siren 7 Deaths. Personally, I don't think either of them are as good as their price point says they are, but the fact they're selling at these price points means that obviously people do think that they are worth that amount of money. I mean, to showcase Twin Flame Tyrant saw a 58% decrease in listings. That's massive. Now I'm going to mention a handful of cards that I mentioned in previous videos for draining out of the market, like cards that look like they were going to spike, that are continuing to drain out of the market, and I think are worth picking up at this point in time. Starting off with Hexplate Wall Breakers, specifically the extended art, because the regular version, which I've been calling out for weeks now, is almost $5 at this point. It started that big spike, and the extended art hasn't really followed suit yet, so you still have time to pick up your copies for cheap if you go for the extended art. It is starting to see both an uptick in price and demand, so I'm not sure how much time you actually have on that, but it's probably going to follow suit to what the regular base version did. Hammer of Nazan, auto-include inside of your Captain America decks. All versions continue to drain out of the market. There are a lot of different printings, so the numbers aren't massive, but certain versions are really, really low on inventory. Is a card that is very powerful in any Voltron deck. So if you have a Voltron deck and you don't have a Hammer of Nazan in it and you want one before it's $15, you should pick it up now. Heir Apparent is causing some other cards to move up in price, like Thrumming Stone. This is arguably the best card in any Heir Apparent commander deck outside of Heir Apparent. Like, this card is disgusting in the deck. And all versions are seeing movement at this point in time. This is a card that at one point was like a $40 card, I believe, the Cold Snap version, and then after a couple reprints it dropped down really low in price. It started to tick back up, but now starting to see a lot more movement, the Heir Apparent being the main catalyst, and that is a strong catalyst that could easily make this card more expensive. Kusari Gama, I mentioned in the previous video, being an artifact that's good inside of that Captain America deck. It's an interesting card. It's never seen a reprint. It's only 42 listings currently on TCG Player. It doesn't take much for a card like this to move out of the market because there's just no inventory and nobody has them just lying around in their collection that they plan on just throwing on TCG Player because, why not? This is a card that's going to probably spike if there's enough demand for it. And Captain America seems to be driving a lot of prices, so I do think the demand is there. Another card for Captain America is Halvar. I mentioned this one previously. Both versions continue to drain out of the market. Although the percentages aren't very high, being like 14 to 18% decreases in listings here, it is just continued decreases week over week. So eventually that's going to add up. It's a very good card in the deck, and it makes sense for that it would go inside of the deck. Like if you're building a deck, you probably want this card in there. We've got a couple more removal spells to talk about now, being Elspeth's Smite and Anoint with Affliction. They are continuing to see movement out of the market. Elspeth's Smite did just get reprinted inside Foundations, so even though it has this pretty substantial decrease in listings, I don't think that is the one I would go for if I were to buy either of these cards. If I were looking to pick up copies of either of them, I'd go with Anoint with Affliction, especially if I'm playing Black and Standard. And lastly, we have Brightcap Badger. This card was a bulk rare. It's getting to be a couple bucks now. I think it still has a little bit of room to grow. It is still seeing a decrease in listings, and it's just an auto include inside of Shroofus, which is a pretty funny, goofy looking commander from Jumpstart. And you know people like their goofy looking dudes, their silly little guys. This is a silly little guy, so Brightcap Badger could continue to see movement because of the fact that people want to build a silly little guy. Now let's talk about some additional cards that have gone up in price. I already mentioned two, being Arabo and the Urborg Scavengers, but now there's a few other cards I wanted to mention here. In the last video I mentioned Nazgul Battlemace Surge Foil. The price has more than doubled since that video, so I hope that you picked up copies when I called it out then. Similarly, Galadriel's Dismissal Surge Foil has saw a big increase in price. Both cards saw a big downtick in listings as well, so there might still be room for them to go up a little further, but there's very few copies available on the market at this point. I had been mentioning Joyra Weatherlight Captain for a few videos now, and I've been highlighting specifically that old border version. And that old border version has caught up in price to the other versions now. So if you built that Iron Man deck or the Captain America deck, I hope that you already picked up your copy, especially if you wanted that old border version, because I believe that old border version is more money than the other versions now. Oddly enough, we have back-to-back weeks of decreases in inventory and increases in price of Edgar Markov, who is getting reprinted at the beginning of the year in Innistrad Remastered. That has been confirmed. I don't know why people are currently buying Edgars, because it's going to go down in price once the new inventory comes into the market. If you're buying an Edgar now, I don't know what you're doing. Weird. And lastly, we have a few cards from Foundation Jumpstart that are seeing big spikes in price. For example, Ophelia and Scythe Cat Cub. Both of these saw large increases in prices. I think it's due to the fact that this set is kind of harder to get than most people assumed, and they are very powerful, potent cards. There's a lot of good stuff inside the Jumpstart set, so if you see it for retail pricing, I would be picking it up because it seems like a lot of fun to open, a lot of fun to play. Jumpstart's a very fun format, and there are some good pulls inside of this set. I mean, Scythe Cat Cub is just like better than Bristly Bill, which is already an expensive card, so people I think should have expected this one to be expensive. But there's a lot of cards inside of this that are moving up in price. Now let's see how well my callouts have been doing by checking out my Arcane Assets portfolio. Arcane Assets is a way that you can mock, buy, and sell cards, so that way you can kind of buy cards that you think will go up in price, sell them when they do, and try to beat the leaderboard, be number one in the leaderboard for the most money at the end of the season. Whoever's in first place gets a collector booster box of Foundation, second place gets a set booster box, and third place gets a bundle. So there's prize support for this. It's totally free, no money involved, and it's a lot of fun. It's a really good way to showcase how well you know the Magic market and how good you are in MTG finance. If you take a look at the leaderboard, you'll see I'm in 7th place right now, so my callouts have been doing pretty well. And as you can see in my portfolio, I have made some moves. I have purchased Arabos, which I believe I mentioned in the last video, but I've also purchased some Paw Patch Formations and Thrumming Stones. And I did sell on my Ivors and my Screaming Nemesises. Both cards I made a large profit off of. I bought the Screaming Nemesises at $12.04 a copy and sold them for $21.91 a copy, while the Ivors I bought at $2.37 a copy and sold 100 copies at $3.90 a piece. Unfortunately, it looks like I should have kept holding on to those Screaming Nemesises because it's now up to $25 almost a copy. I could have made an extra $400 there. But the Ivors are starting to downtick, so I'm glad I sold those. I currently have 100 copies of Arabo that I'm just kind of waiting on the price to adjust correctly, considering the price has already gone up on TCG Player. If you want to go make an account right now, I would just dump all of the starting money you get straight into Arabos. And if you want to make that move right now and just start playing, link in the description of this video. Check it out. The Bright Cap Badgers, I was considering selling the other day. I haven't yet, but if inventory doesn't change much the next time I run stats, I will be selling them. Hexplate Wall Breakers are up to $6.33 on here, and I bought those at $2.16, so I am considering selling those at this point. I think it has a little more room to grow, but not by a crazy amount, so it might be the end of my hold on Hexplate Wallbreaker. And for the Joyra Weatherlight Captains, I'm just kind of waiting for that price to adjust because I believe that should be around $5 at this point. And once it hits around $5, $6, I'll be moving off of those. And that is everything I have for this episode of Spicy Specs. Let me know what you're speculating on, and I hope you enjoyed this video. I'll see you next time. Peace out, everybody.